storyboarding. This class is about creating a storyboard and an animatic. And I already created the storyboard, and I'll show you how I went about with every shot and how they are a continuous flow within the storyboard to make it comprehensible and to make sure that the entertainment value is still high. But right now, all I have is the roughs of that storyboard, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to clean it up. So I imported the storyboard into the whole project into Storyboard Pro. If you see on the bottom, these are all of the panels that I have. So within the 2 minutes, I have 62 cuts. So when I imported this, the shot numbers, no, the shot duration has changed. So it looks like I'm going to have to reset those and basically retime my animatic. So by default, I have, every time I import a layer or import a scene, it's set to about, I don't know, set to 4 seconds. So that's why the 2 minutes has turned into 4 minutes. But these are all the cuts. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start all the way at the beginning. And I'm going to do a cleanup. As I do a cleanup, I'm going to talk about what I was thinking and how I wanted the show to flow. And at the end of the cleanup, I'm going to go back to the beginning and do any camera moves and or special effects or anything else I need to do to create an animatic that's 2 minutes in length. So right now I have my default templates, which every time I open up Storyboard Pro, I have set to have all these layers available to me by default, with the exception of the top layer, of which I imported as a PNG. So I'll take that top layer and I'll drag it down so it's just under my ink and my color layer. Since I don't have any layer that I need for background right here, or roughs, or revisions, I'll just delete those layers to save space. So I will unlock my ink. I will lock my imported file, which is that PNG. And I'll make sure that I turn this opacity down so I can see what I'm drawing on top of it. And since this frame might be a little small, it seems to be a 4x9 frame, I will go in, I'll highlight the whole area, and I'll basically just widen out. the frame. So when you're doing any show, meaning any production, show meaning a television show, a picture show, aka a movie or film, or a stage show, you usually want to, the first shot you usually would want to do is have an establishing shot. Unless you're going to have a big reveal within the scene itself. But usually, most films or television shows, they have an establishing shot to show you the location and the surroundings of where the action is taking place. So, our first shot, or cut, will be a baseball field. So I have my baseball field here, and I'm basically just gonna make a prettier version of what I already have established when I did my rough. So I'm not a baseball fan, so I'm not too sure how a baseball arena is supposed to look. But within this story, it's about kids, and they basically are imagining that they are in a baseball arena. And if I wanted to make these lines better, I would use my line tool, and then with the contour tool, you can round out any edges. So as long as you get the idea down and the layout people all the designers, like the background designers and character designers, everyone that's in production can understand what your drawings are supposed to be, then you'll be okay. Because storyboarding is usually done by directors in anime, and you kind of have to move kind of fast. Here I would kind of be taking my leisure just for demonstration purposes. and I want everyone to get familiar with the process. So right now I'm just looking to see if I have any cars already inside of my models, and constantly save, but it doesn't seem like I have any 3D models, so the cars that I draw are basically just going to be represented by a bunch of little squares or rectangles. Since they're supposed to be on the outside of the stadium, and it's a bird-eye view, you'll basically just be seeing the top of the cars. And remember, when you're doing anime or any other animation, your backgrounds are usually going to be seen between 1 second and 8 seconds, depending if you're doing anime. So anime, sometimes they hold shots longer than they do in other forms of animation. And they usually do that to save money on productions. So if we toggle off our original drawing, you can see that it's a little bit more cleaned up. And one thing on the original drawing that I neglect to see that I did was indicate a little character on the pitcher's mound, as well as 2 characters on home. So arrow indicates home base. And from there, if you're into baseball, you'll recognize that this is a pitcher's mound, and that's home base. So lock that layer, and on my foreground layer, I might add just the top of a character or 2 characters. Which would be represented by circles, more or less. And I would color them a dark gray. with my brush, I would make sure to use paint behind, so I don't paint over the line itself. And I would also indicate who's where if I needed to. So I would put an arrow well, first I would change the color back to black. And since this character's name is Sylvie, I would indicate Sylvie's on that mound. Cack is catcher. And Epi is on. He's up pitching. Maybe put a little. I'm sorry, he's batting. And he's put a little line there to indicate that he's holding a bat. So as we skip to next frame, I like the proportions that I have of her already, but I will definitely drag that down. And just to save space on the final file, I would erase a couple of layers. I would keep my background layer because I will be using it. Unlock my ink layer, and I'll start drawing on top of this character. Now, one thing that I do need to do is import the character sheet for my Sylvie character. Now, import as a layer, and I would find Sylvie. And right here I have all three of them. And I also have a character model sheet with her turnaround. So I'd import that just to have it. And if I needed to, I could drag that into my global library. So now I have Sylvie in my global library. Once again, I would drag that lower. And I would just move it to the side of it. Or maybe even shrink it. So I have an indication of what my character looks like. Lock that layer to make sure I don't write over it. And I'll go in and start drawing my character somewhat on model. As long as you give a indication of the character and they look somewhat like they would in production, it'll help your animators and everyone down the pipeline. So since her head is pointing down and in this direction, all you'll really see is the top of her nose, a piece of her eye, her chin, no indication of her mouth. And I'll just put what she's wearing. And she's a thin little girl, so let's keep that in mind when I'm drawing her. She's wearing a baseball glove. And she's wearing a skirt. Her hand is on her knee. She's wearing sneakers. That's one thing I don't have on the model sheet. And this other leg is bent backwards, more or less. And her arm is behind her back. Now I would also paint behind the character using my paintbrush again. Because what this does is it fills in your character. So when you do your background, your character isn't messed with your background. And so hopefully, if you fill it in correctly, you can't see through your character. You can use a paint bucket for this. But for instructional purposes, I'm just going to color this one in by hand using a mid-tone gray, and to make sure that you have your paint behind on your brush set up, which is this button right here. Drawer behind, sorry. This also helps when you're doing an animatic and you're moving the camera or you're moving a character on the screen. It gives the illusion that the character is solid. And that's good enough. And make sure you save. So, we have our background that we'll do next. So we could turn off our model sheet. And hopefully this character won't be confused with any other character, since there's only 3 characters in this short. And I'll just use my background layer to draw my background, but make sure that I have my ink layer turned off. And I'll just draw my background as I would, making sure to use a black. And now make sure to go all the way from edge to edge. Just like before, I'm using my contour tool with my line tool. And I won't go into grave detail with this background because I'm sure it will be changed once you get into background design or layout design. But just to give the indication of where the background should be. Now, my character doesn't seem to be fully solid, so I will go back in and use a solid white and see if I could paint behind my character. See if I could turn the character more solid. And if that doesn't work, then I'll just leave it alone.